Hello everyone, this is Beatrice and today we're going to look into the collaborative task and the useful expressions you can use to do this task really well. So, first of all, the collaborative task, as you might know already, is the second part of the speaking and listening exam. And in this task, the examiner starts by giving an opinion or talking about a situation that he or she has. So after the examiner gives his opinion about something, you have to keep the conversation going. So it's your responsibility to ask questions, to make interactions so that the examiner keeps speaking. And this is very important because if you stop speaking, the examiner will also stop speaking. So now we're going to look into different expressions you can use at different parts of the exam, at different parts of this collaborative task, and I'm going to show you a method to pass the collaborative task. So first of all, the expressions you should use while in the collaborative task are asking questions. So that's the first part, to start asking questions to find out more information, to show understanding, to make do expressions that show that you understand, expressions for thinking, for gathering your thoughts, suggestions and advice, so to give suggestions, to give advice to the examiner. And sometimes you have to contradict the examiner and talk about the opposite point of view. So if he has a point of view, you should give the opposite point of view. Also, it's very important in the collaborative task to express possibility. So to use expressions that express possibility. Let's move on to this. So to ask questions. Examples of good questions to start off. Why do you think that? Because it's normally an opinion. Or why do you think that this is not a good idea? If they think something is not a good idea. If they're going to talk about a third person they know. This could be a sister, a brother, a friend, their wife, their niece, their nephew. Okay, so if they do something and the examiner doesn't agree, you could ask, why does she, does he, is he? Okay, so remember to ask questions, not only about the examiner, but if they're talking about a third person, ask questions about this third person. So for example, the examiner could say, my sister doesn't let her son use any electronic devices, any phones, any computers ever. I don't think this is a good idea. So you could ask, does she think it's a bad idea because the phone can distract him from other activities? So you could always ask about this third person. Then, don't you think it might be a good idea to, or do you? Also, you can ask questions about the examiner. So let's move on to the next point. So showing understanding. So this is similar to a question, but a little bit different. So you would say, so if the examiner says something, you can say, so, and repeat more or less what the examiner said so that the examiner understands that you're talking, that you understand what he's saying, and this will make him speak more. So for example, if he says, my sister doesn't let her son use her phone, and I think this is a bad idea. So you could say, so you think it's a bad idea that she doesn't let him use her phone. Okay, so that's easy. Just so, and you repeat the idea the examiner was saying. Then this might seem, our next point might seem a little bit unnecessary, but it's a great idea to use thinking expressions. So in a natural, normal conversation, you might be talking to someone and you need a little bit of time to think of an answer, and this is perfectly okay. So you would use expressions such as, let me see. Okay, so don't be afraid of using sounds that sound native, like because even the examiner uses this to gather their thoughts. So they have to think of a way of answering, and you also have to think of ideas to answer the examiner. So it's great to use these expressions because it sounds natural and it gives you time to think. So the next point, suggestions and advice. The suggestions and advice are a very important part of the Trinity exam. They're listed in their language functions, and there are several ways of doing them. So we've got this first part here. Suggestions are a bit lighter than advice. So suggestions are questions like, why don't you ask her? How about speaking to? Or how about going to? After how about and this second one, have you tried? The verb is in ing. So for example, if you say, why don't you go to the university? You would say, how about going to the university? Or have you tried going to the university? Or even, don't you think it might be a good idea to? Okay, so that's for suggestions. And now we're going to move on to advice. So, advice. Let's see. With advice, you should use models such as should, shouldn't, ought to. Okay, and the second conditional. So, I think you should go. I think you shouldn't do. You ought to. Okay, so you ought to and you should is the same, but it's easier to use you shouldn't than you ought not to. So this is a better way of doing it. Let's see, sorry. Okay, so yes, this is basically the same. You should, you ought to. Some people say ought to sounds a little bit stronger. And then we've got this second conditional, if I were you, I would. So basically you're using the second conditional to put yourself in the other person's shoes. So in your case, I would. If I were you, I would. And be careful because it's if I were you, because this is the subjunctive. So it's not if I was you, it is if I were you. So let's move on to our next point. Our next point is contradicting. Okay, so also the examiner has an opinion, and if you want to give the opposite opinion, you can start by saying yes, but, yeah, I'm not sure, I think that, or I see what you mean, but, and then you could talk about advantages and disadvantages. So first you contradict, yes, but, and if they're saying it's a bad idea to use mobile phones, you can talk about the advantages of using mobile phones. Yes, but children nowadays have to learn about IT, or they need to know how a computer works, or other children have them and they could be helpful for learning purposes, so they could help them learn things apart from entertaining them. And you could use them, you could allow them only 1 hour a day. Okay, so here we've got yes but, you can start with yes but and then move on to the advantages and disadvantages. So you could say it might help, it's a great way of, or before it's a good idea to prepare for this part of the exam or all parts of the exam. It's a good idea to think about the advantages and the disadvantages of a certain situation. So if you're trained to think of this, when you have to speak to the examiner, you will immediately be thinking about the good things of doing something, the bad things of doing something. So this is always a good idea. It's a bad idea to always agree with the examiner because this doesn't create a conversation. So if the examiner has one point of view, it's okay. It's even a good idea to give the other point of view, the opposite point of view. So you can use expressions like it helps, it can be good for, it's a great way of, one of the advantages is, okay? So let's move on to the next point. We're going to, and the last point. This is expressing possibility and also not being sure, okay? Expressing uncertainty. So again, in a natural conversation, you're not always 100% sure of what is going to happen. Sometimes you want to predict something in the future that there is a possibility of it happening, but you're not sure. Also, when you're giving advice, it's nice to say this might, it's probably, right? So you can use expressions of not being completely sure. So expressing some possibility. So we've got conditionals. If you ask me, it might be a good idea. So you could use a conditional to, it will probably, if you go to university, they will probably give you useful advice. And I think this is the most important one. Might, using might. It might be a good idea. She might need some help. It might help you if. Okay, so this is also a way of giving advice without sounding too imposing. So using might, you can also say maybe. Maybe it can help you. The difference between might and maybe is that might goes between the subject and the verb, and maybe goes at the beginning of the sentence. So maybe she's worried about. Another good word you can use, must. Must is for when you're sure. Okay, so for example, if I see you come through the door and you're wet, oh, it must be raining, right? The possibility, the greatest possibility, the highest possibility is that it is raining outside. So it must be raining. So if you walk in the door and you're wet, it's because it must be raining. Also, you can use must to show empathy. So, oh, I'm sorry, that must be terrible, or it must be really difficult. Okay, and also you can use another expression like, well, I'm not sure, maybe. All of these expressions are good to use in the Trinity exam. So that's it for the collaborative task. Remember, it's very important for you to ask questions, to contradict, and to talk about the possibility and not be 100% certain. And the best way to do this is by practicing. So good luck with your collaborative task.